Podcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. A very warm welcome to, I guess, what's going to be our final webinar for 2019. So really happy to have you all here. I can see more people joining in. In the meantime, we could probably get started with introductions and just laying out the house rules. So the webinar today is a token system to manage capacity, create customer pull, and deliver value, brought to you by Swift Kanban from Digite. We will start with some introductions. I'll give you a little bit of an overview on Digite and Swift Kanban, and then I will hand over the session to Patrick Steyaert, who's our main speaker for today. We will do question answers during the webinar as well as at the end. So Patrick wants to make it a little more interactive, so we'll do it a little differently for those of you who've attended our previous webinars. So what we will do is Patrick is going to pause perhaps 3 or 4 times during the webinar and ask our questions if you have any. And if you do, just let us know via the questions panel on your screens on the right or via the chat, and we will unmute you so you can actually ask your question on the air, so to speak. Of course, if you're in a noisy environment, sometimes that happens. And if you just prefer to use chat, just let us know and we can go ahead and read out your question. And if there aren't any clarifications, Patrick should be able to hopefully answer them. So that's how we're going to do it. Of course, the webinar is being recorded, and we will provide the recording of the webinar to you after the webinar. So with that, let me get on with the introductions. Patrick Steyaert is the founder of Okaloa. My name is Mahesh Singh. I'm co-founder and Senior Vice President of Marketing at Digite, and I've been doing this for many years now. It's one of the best part of my work here at Digite, talking to thought leaders like Patrick on webinars along with all of you guys. Patrick, of course, is well known to the community, Kanban community, and around the world. For those of you who may not know exactly who he is the founder of Okaloa. Okaloa Flow Lab is the simulation game system that he's created, using which he teaches and coaches business agility, around the world and help stimulate agile thinking. With his partner Arlette Workerman, who's also on the call, he's really succeeded in creating I would say a real phenomenon around the world. And together they use the Okaloa Flow Lab for training and coaching a variety of customers around the world. He's also very well known for his upstream customer and discovery Kanban. So all of the work that happens before work gets to the execution stage of your Kanban boards. He's really the sort of pioneer for that work, and here at Digite we have a lot of respect for that. We believe a lot of the critical stuff happens in the upstream phase of any work that you do, and we actually support a lot of that body of knowledge in our tooling. And then Patrick, of course, is the recipient of the 2015 Brickle Award for the outstanding contribution to the Kanban community. Patrick, a warm welcome. Before I hand over the mic to you, let me just quickly go through a couple of slides on Digite, and then we'll get started. So for those of you who may not know us, Digite has been a pioneer in a variety of web-based collaborative tooling for distributed teams. We are headquartered in Cupertino, California, but have offices in India, in UK, and of course in the US. We have nearly 1 million users of our products around the world, and our products span lean, agile, ALM, project portfolio management, software development, etc. And of course, we are the creators of Swift Kanban, Swift ESP, and Swiftly. These are products that we have in the flow management space, lean agile space. Bulk of our customers tend to be IT, software, and DevOps teams, but we also have a lot of customers in the non-tech space, whether they are marketing, HR, procurement, legal, just a variety of different use cases. We also have a lot of personal Kanban users who use Swift Kanban for managing their personal work in a variety of scenarios. Swift Kanban Analytics is one of the key things that a lot of people like about the tool. We provide a lot of advanced capabilities in here to help you measure and see how your systems and how your teams are performing, and be able to balance the demand on them versus the capacity you have to do that work. And of course, today's topic deals a lot with that. We provide a lot of capability around portfolio management and enterprise services planning, which is a separate body of knowledge around Kanban, which has been created by the Lean Kanban University. And we provide a lot of capability around that in terms of building and managing portfolios, doing risk analysis and risk management, demand shaping, etc. And of course, the statistical techniques like Monte Carlo simulation, etc., to help better forecast your work and be more predictable about your work. We have a wide range of customers, and you probably recognize some of the names here. And we have customers that go from 50 to 100 users to tens of thousands of users. So we have some pretty awesome customers that have helped us really create this set of tooling. So with that, let me again welcome you, Patrick, onto the webinar today, and let's hand over the session to Patrick.
Thank you, Mahesh. So it's always nice to join you guys. The respect is mutual. I've encountered you guys since, I think, 2010 or something. Lean Kanban Benelux.
Yep, that's right.
So it goes back to a couple of years. It's always been a pleasure.
Thank you, Patrick.
It's always been a pleasure. So the purpose of today, what I want to talk about is token systems. And I made the title very practical. So things that like managing capacity, creating customer pool, these are all very practical issues, and I hope that the participants to the webinar will see the practicality of it. But at the same time, I think by using token systems, we can go beyond the practical, and I think there's a potential in there that is actually quite game changing. So it's about so my strong belief in token systems as a way of building a foundation for business agility. So and that's for me the game changing part of it. What I see in the world today when we're talking about agile at a larger scale than the team scale, I see some very practical things, but then oftentimes they might not be so agile. And then I see some agile things, and then oftentimes they might not be so practical. And so what we try to do with these token systems is to find that combination of very practical things that also really make a difference in terms of business agility. As Mahesh said, I structured the presentation in a couple of blocks, and I will leave some room in each block for some questions. Hopefully that can make it a little bit more interactive. This work has emerged out of my work with upstream Kanban, although it's quite different from upstream Kanban. But it emerged out of the customer Kanban token system that I pioneered in upstream Kanban. But then it got a rapid evolution through our use of simulation, and where we were allowed to rapidly evolve the concepts because we were using a simulation environment, but then also being able to work with customers, and you'll see some examples of that, to work with customers to test those ideas that came out of the simulations. So it's based on practical experience, but also because we're using simulations, we can rapidly develop ideas. As I said, it's about agility at a larger scale than the team scale. But what I'm going to do is first of all start very briefly at the team level. So here's a picture of a team, and what you see on the picture is the team uses a board and has a stand-up, and next to their board is the Agile Manifesto. As a reminder for the team about the principles. And then oftentimes when I'm with a live audience, I ask the question, is this an Agile team? And then people obviously doubt. From the evidence, it's hard to tell whether this is an Agile team, yes or no. It's not because you're doing some of the Agile practices that you are an agile team. It's not because you can talk about the principles. It's not because you refer to the principles that you are an agile team. So people might be in doubt. We don't know. From the evidence, it's hard to tell whether this is an agile team, yes or no. So in terms of the agile way, obviously that's clear for most people today. It's not about just doing the mechanistic practices, having a stand-up, doing a board, having a board, and stuff like that. That's not sufficient. We do think that it's not just about being agile neither. It's not because you adhere to a certain set of idealistic principles. In our belief, that's not sufficient neither. And there's multiple reasons for that. And one reason is that it appears that each method adheres to its own idealistic principles. So then the question becomes, which idealistic principles are you talking about? And secondly, principles are just that, they're principles. So for us, the big differentiator, the big challenge, the big what makes the difference is the becoming part. How do you become agile? So doing and being in themselves are not sufficient. What is important also is the becoming. So it's all about capabilities, and not just practicable principles, but real capabilities. And what is most important in the becoming is the effectual capabilities, the capabilities that help you build capabilities, the capabilities that help you change without telling people what to do. So the capabilities to have an effect in the organization, to affect change. But not affecting change in a way that you tell people what to do. So affect change with respect for people, and affect change where you develop the capabilities into people, not impose practices or just impose practices or principles. To make that concrete. So virtual Kanban systems are such an effectual capability. Virtual Kanban systems, through the use of column WIP limits, don't tell people what to do. The only thing that the column WIP limits impose is a constraint, and that constraint enables flow. And so people need to organize. The team needs to organize itself around that constraint. So that work starts to flow, and then improving the capability to deliver value. If work flows, that improves our capability to deliver value across a workflow by means of a pull system. So column WIP limits are part of an effectual capability. They create a capability or they improve the capability to deliver value across a workflow. They're effectual in the sense that they don't tell people what to do. People need to reorganize themselves around those WIP limits, that constraint. But still, it has an effect in terms of better flow and improved capability. Now, obviously, this is all at the team level. So this demonstrates the idea of becoming at the team level. But obviously, we're interested at agility at the level of the entire organization, at the level of an agile business. Now, again, if I show this picture and I ask, is this an agile business? What we see is a couple of or a set of agile teams, and these might be teams that truly are becoming more agile continuously. But then, if you look at the cross-team level and the portfolio level, what we see is boards. Again, what we see is boards and a stand-up, and this is the typical situation today. Once we go beyond the team level, it boils down to boards and the stand-up or a meeting around those boards. Question is this an agile business? Can we see enterprise flow? Can we see collaboration across organizational silos? It is hard to tell from this picture. So again, just as with at the team level, we need to question whether this is an agile business, yes or no. So the idea of it's not just doing, it's not just being, it's about becoming. The idea of becoming agile also applies at the level of the business. So the question here now becomes, what are effectual capabilities, not just at the team level, but also at the level of the entire organization. And then the next question next to that is, can we extend the idea of virtual Kanban systems to the organizational level? And our answer is going to be, well, they do not scale very well. It's not clear that they scale. Virtual Kanban systems with column limits, it's not clear that they scale to the organizational level. I'll give a couple of examples for that. And then obviously we're going to look at ways that we can amend that situation. And core to that is our suggestion that we need to go back to the roots. While we evolved towards virtual Kanban systems, the root of Kanban is actual physical Kanban systems that use physical tokens to do the same thing that we are doing with virtual Kanban systems, but in a physical world, but then using not column WIP limits, but physical Kanban tokens. And our suggestion is that we need to go back to those roots, and that physical Kanban tokens or Kanban tokens open up a whole new pathway of effectual capabilities to start talking about to become more agile at the organizational level. So if we go back to the roots, the function of Kanban tokens, if you go back to where it comes from, then what you see on the slide is you have a supplying process, the little person that makes tires or wheels, and we have a customer process where those wheels are used in an assembly to make cars. And obviously, if those two processes are not synchronized with each other, then we will have a buildup of inventory in between. And so the function of the Kanban token is to manage that inventory, or in other words, to synchronize those two processes. And the approach is very simple. if I ship a set of tires to the customer process, I add a Kanban token. And when those tires are actually effectively being used by the customer process, the Kanban token is sent back. So the Kanban token is sent back. So the shipping includes this Kanban token. If the tires are used, that Kanban token is sent back to the supplying process and acting as a signal to the supplying process to send a new set of tires. So what we will do is explore what will happen when we go back to those routes and when we start using Kanban tokens rather than virtual Kanban systems. And we will explore what effectual capabilities that will give us for changing towards a more agile business. The reason why we strongly believe in going back to tokens is that while the Kanban community has moved from physical tokens to virtual Kanban systems with WIP limits and not with physical tokens anymore, what we see in the world at large is quite surprising, is something different. And in the world at large, what we see is that people are exploring and discovering the power of tokens as a way as an effectual capability. So in the world of digital coin, Bitcoin, tokenomics, the world at large is exploring tokens as a capability, as a way to incentivize specific behaviors by using tokens to create a kind of mini economy. So tokens in the world at large are being explored as an effectual capability, and that is being done at a very intensive in a very intensive way. There's many examples of that. So if we can hook into that direction, into that stream of thought, and this can be very powerful. The example on the slide, and the little picture on the slide, is an example of a token system, and it illustrates very well how a token system can incentivize a certain specific behavior. So the token system here is a simple token system where if you buy a drink, you get a token. If you have a number of tokens, it gives you a free drink. So it incentivizes a certain behavior. Maybe morally not the right behavior, but at least it's an example of how tokens can help to incentivize a certain behavior. So to sum up this first part, Agile is about becoming. We need to have a way of becoming. So that's the effectual capabilities. Virtual Kanban systems are an effectual capability, but if we go to the organizational level, then virtual Kanban systems might not scale to the organizational level. Our conjecture, our suggestion is that we need to go back to the roots, use token systems, and then hook into what is happening in the world at large with token systems in terms of tokenomics, and that can create a very powerful effectual capability to incentivize for or to build business agility upon, to become more agile as a business. So if there's any questions at this point.
So it looks like there is a question from Patrick Lee. Patrick, let me bring you online and maybe you could ask the question directly.
Yeah, hey Patrick. My question really is over most of the organization nowadays are distributed, right? So especially if we're talking about organizations. So how does this token system work over different geographies? Because assuming with tokens, with physical tokens, you're passing them on when the capacity becomes available.
Yes.
So you have to generate some kind of virtual token, right? So what's some examples of that?
So yes, if you go back to the roots with Kanban, it's really physical tokens, but obviously in the meantime, people have been working on digitokens, virtual tokens, and so in a distributed environment, obviously we're talking about virtual tokens. I think so. If I continue to explain the token system or a couple of token systems, we can come back to your question and explore a little bit what that would mean in a virtual token system environment.
That's great.
Okay.
Yep. Sounds good.
Cool.
Great, thanks, Patrick, for your question. I should probably mention on air at this time that I guess this webinar actually happened because of a few tweets that I saw from Patrick, and I asked him some questions, and he said, "Hey, instead of doing this back and forth on Twitter, why not have a webinar?" And that's how we got together on this webinar. And my questions were based on some of the things that he's talking about, and he's doing that today on the webinar, which obviously at this time Swift Kanban, our Kanban tool, doesn't support exactly. So I'm looking forward to working with Patrick to extend our capabilities in order to support some of these concepts and be able to support virtual tokens in our tooling. And hopefully we can bring out something soon to the market. So I'm looking forward to that.
May I just follow up with one more thing?
Okay.
So can you talk a little bit more about the difference of the effects that the token system had over, or advantages it had over the WIP limits across the organization?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that brings me to the first case that I want to discuss. So we're going to see an example of that. We're going to actually go through two cases where we actually see examples where token systems can be a lot more powerful than just virtual Kanban systems. So shall I go into the case?
I think so, Patrick. There aren't any other questions right now.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to explore this through two cases. So I'm going to first start with a case of an end-to-end flow. So this is actually the case that I used in my Essential Upstream Kanban guide. So what you see before you is a visualization, a board that visualizes the end-to-end flow of an IT maintenance team. So you see two boards. The left-hand board is the upstream part. The right-hand board is the downstream. Upstream is actually the demand management, managing all the demand that comes in. They end up in a backlog, and then downstream is actually fulfilling that demand. And so what you will see typically in an end-to-end flow like that is that the virtual Kanban system only covers a part of the end-to-end flow, right? You will see column WIP limits in the largest part of the downstream, but you will not see WIP limits upstream. So upstream is just a visualization typically, and then deep downstream, again you will see the absence of WIP limits or infinite WIP limits. So absence of no WIP limits. So the virtual Kanban system, the worker pool, only covers a part of the board, and the reason is upstream because people, if they apply WIP limits, if they apply WIP limits at all, they're not necessarily productive because upstream, the biggest challenge is not the work, but the biggest challenge is to make sure that you have sufficient options. So that explains to a large part the absence of WIP limits. Now, I'm not going to focus on that. What I'm going to focus on is the deep downstream. So deep downstream, what we often see is a set of columns with the purpose of accepting the work that or the outputs that were produced by the team. So you'll see either validation columns or acceptance columns just before the actual deployment of the solution. Typically, they are not limited because acceptance needs to be done by upstream people that are managing the demand, or even customers or users. And so the feeling is that those columns cannot be WIP limited because we don't have control over the time spending of the users or the focus of the users. So what we will typically see in such a system is that we do have worker pool in that virtual Kanban system, but in the end-to-end flow, the customers push requests in, but are not ready or not available to pull requests out. Yeah. And this is a recurring complaint. If we set up a Kanban system and we start from the customer frictions and the team frictions, then a recurrent team friction is, yes, the customer is there to continuously push work in, but they're never available to help us to pull work out, either by helping us if we have questions or by accepting the solutions that we have delivered. So we have worker pull, but customer push. Now, a virtual Kanban system, extending the virtual Kanban system, a column WIP limit could be theoretically could be a solution, but in practice it is not a solution. A customer pull would mean that if the customer is not available to help to accept solutions, then the customer should not add requests in the upstream. So that would be a customer pull. Now we could have a column WIP limit on the right-hand side of the board, on the acceptance column, for example. We could have a column WIP limit, and the purpose of that column WIP limit would be that you don't pile up too many requests in the acceptance. So that would theoretically force the customer to accept solutions. But the practical problem out of that is that before that signal of the column WIP limit, that signal reaches the customer, your entire downstream board needs to fill up. Before it reaches the upstream, and before it reaches the customer and prevents the customer for adding more requests. So in theory, the column WIP limit would work, but in practice, there's a very high cost, and the cost would mean that your entire system needs to come to a halt before the customer is stopped from adding more requests. Now that is quite an unacceptable cost. So the column WIP limits theoretically are a solution, but in practice are not a solution. What we need is a signal that immediately, rather than having that signal to propagate through our entire downstream board, we need a signal that goes immediately from our deep downstream, from our the right-hand side of the board, immediately goes back to the upstream part, to the left-hand side of the board. So this is a customer Kanban. So we can introduce a Kanban token, a simple Kanban token that immediately solves this problem. So the customer Kanban token is a physical or a virtual token where the customer we hand out a number of these tokens to the customers, and the customer needs to have a token like that in order to be able to start a request. So that token is put on that request and travels along with that request. So there should be a token also here and here and here. It travels around along with that request until that request is completed. If the request is completed, the token goes back to the customer. The token is recycled when the value is delivered. So now we have a direct signal. The signal propagates immediately from complete back to the customer. The customer Kanban token is an effectual capability in the sense that it requires the customer to collaborate with the downstream team. If the customer is not collaborating with the downstream team, then the customer's requests will pile up in the downstream. The customer will not receive tokens back, so will not be able to push in new requests. So this incentivizes the customer to start working with the downstream team if the customer wants to receive the tokens back if the customer wants to add new requests. So what we see here is a very simple token system that has a certain effectual capability in the sense that it turns customer push into a customer pull system. The power from the token system, the fact that it's a token system, is that with the token system, things don't need to propagate column per column. We can shortcut entire parts of the board to send signals back to more upstream parts of the board. And so that's the power of the token system here. So this is a first example. So again, I want to pause for questions in terms of maybe clarification, if it needs some clarification, if it's not clear what the customer Kanban token is.
All right. Great. So I think Patrick had a question again. So Patrick, go ahead and well, I think let me just make sure you're unmuted.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
So this remind me a little bit of the drum roll buffers. It sounds like the drum beat thing, right?
Yes.
So how do you know, with the token, how do you know how many tokens in total should you make available for to represent your capability?
Yeah. So oftentimes we base this on historical data. So we start with visualization. We start counting the number of requests that are in progress. So obviously, limiting WIP at the delivery part is important to get the process under control. Once the process is under control, we can start seeing what the number of requests are that the team is delivering at a comfortable level. And that gives us an input to the number of tokens that we can allow on the board.
Would a shortcut be matching the throughput at the request level?
Not necessarily, because it's if you have an idea about throughput and you have an idea about your lead times, then you can use Little's law to calculate throughput in terms of requests. Not in terms of work items, but in terms of requests.
Right.
And then you can use Little's law to calculate the number of requests. So not just throughput, you would need to have lead time also.
Right. Okay, got it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And the distribution of the token, because let's assume you have multiple customers, right? I mean, even we're not talking retail, but even within the organization, there's often you face multiple stakeholders. Would you have a broker that does the distribution of the tokens? Does it really go to the customer hand in hand? Because then you say you get the 2, you get 3, something like that.
Yeah.
Or whoever comes first gets this, right?
So the broker ID is something that we will come back to. If we start thinking about a marketplace, then the broker ID is really becoming a very relevant idea. Now, if you just talk about customer Kanban in itself, then again, your historical data can help you. If you have multiple customers, your historical data can tell you in the past what was the percentage of requests that were handled for each type of customer, and that can give you an initial distribution for your tokens. But surely you need a governance. You need a governance mechanism to govern that. In the IT maintenance case, for example, in this case, it was the change advisory board that acted as a governance mechanism.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool.
So Patrick, I had a question very similar to what the other Patrick just asked. It's confusing to be dealing with two Patricks at the same time. So as you know, we are a product company, and we have hundreds of customers literally, and many customers, especially for our Swift Kanban tool, are very active users and have suggestions to serious requirements that they cannot function without having the tool enhanced in some way or the other. And of course, on our side, we are always capacity constrained. So sort of the same question, but in a ISV, in a product company like Digitech context, is it possible to be sort of allocating tokens to customers, or there has to be a different way of working with it?
Yeah. So the customer Kanban tokens do not necessarily need to cover your entire capacity. Okay. Right, so you can have capacity at your own discretion, and only hand out tokens for a part of the capacity that you want to free up for your customers.
Right.
So
that's always a challenge.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes, I agree. I agree with you. That's a good way to.
So the case that I'm going to talk about next, which is an HR product development company. In the company, they're doing a mix of product development as well as customer projects. And so for the customer projects, a customer Kanban token system is used, but that's only a part of the capacity that's allocated for those customers.
Okay, awesome.
And you can have a broker, as Patrick also. You could have a broker like a product manager that acts as a broker in between.
Of course, yes. I just want to remind folks on the webinar that if you have a question, just ask it on the questions panel, and we will bring you on. But let's go ahead. Let's move forward, Patrick.
Okay, cool. So case number 2, as I said, this is an product development company for HR, and so at the portfolio level, what you see is multiple sources of demand, which means the sources of demand come from the strategy of the company, so from ultimately from the CEO of the company. So strategy-wise, product development, and then also multiple customers where there's actual customer projects to integrate the product into the customer environment, as well as some maintenance. So there's multiple sources of demand. So that's on the left-hand side of the board. There's multiple sources of supply on the right-hand side of the board, meaning that you have multiple feature teams. So feature teams are full stack teams, as well as a technology team. So we have multiple sources of supply, and the board visualizes all the work at a high enough level of abstraction. So a variety of work and initiatives across the entire organization. Now, since this is what is called a portfolio Kanban, what is absent there is WIP limits. It's not a virtual Kanban system, but still, because of demand outstripping supply, there's more demand than can be delivered. On the left-hand side of the board, and this is very typical, what we resort to is a very conventional means, which is selection of initiatives. By some means, we select initiatives based on cost of delay or based on ROI or whatever, because the demand outstrips capability. What we don't see on the right-hand side is, because we don't have WIP limits, we have no explicit representation of capacity. And so the capacity is not present on the board. So again, we can talk about the sense and the nonsense of a virtual Kanban system of column WIP limits here. Now, the practice turns out that most, if not all, portfolio Kanban is not much more than a visualization, a board where people where we have a meeting around that board. So that's the reality. So apparently, it's not trivial to have a Kanban system here. Now again, a board and just a meeting is doing Agile. The question is, what are the effectual capabilities that we can bring to bear to become more Agile at this level? So before diving into that, let's first analyze a little bit of the challenges that we have here. So I already said that at this level, we have multiple sources of demand, multiple customers, strategy, product management. So that's on the demand side. We have multiple sources of supply, and those could be technology teams, component teams that manage a certain technology or manage a certain competence, or they could be competence teams organized around a certain competence, or they could be full feature teams organized around a certain feature set of the product. So we have multiple sources of demand, multiple sources of supply, and then the core challenge is matching that demand with that supply. At a regular basis, we have demand coming in, and then if demand comes in, we need to find a supply to fulfill that demand. And on a regular basis, we have supply that becomes available, capacity in the supply that becomes available, and we need to match it with the demand to start using that capacity. Now, because we have multiple sources at both sides, this is an end-to-end matching problem. And to me, this is a core problem of the organization. So this is a core organizational problem, is how to match demand with supply. Now, this problem, the fact that it's an end-to-end matching problem is already a challenge, but it gets worse because obviously in a VUCA context, in a context of rapidly evolving markets, we need to deal with volatility. So demand is never stable. It always fluctuates. It can fluctuate on a very short term. It can fluctuate on a very long term. Fluctuation can be in terms of volume, seasonal fluctuations, yearly fluctuations over the years. It can fluctuate in terms of volume. It also can fluctuate in terms of type, where we have a certain type of demands, and over the years the market changes and towards a new type of demand, on a longer term, but also on short term, demand can fluctuate between different types of demand. You have more demand for product development, for customer development, for which type of customer, for which part of the product. So we can have all kinds of fluctuations on the demand side. So dealing with that fluctuation would not be a problem if our capacity would be infinitely flexible, but capacity is not infinitely flexible. We have constraints in our capacity. Capacity is constrained in terms of volume, in terms of how fast we can increase that volume of capacity, how fast can we staff up, what's the cost of staffing up, how fast can we staff down, what is the cost of staffing down. So we have constraints in terms of capacity, in the volume of the capacity. We have constraints in the type of capacity. We might have different types of capacity, and then if the volume of the demand demand fluctuates to a different type of demand, maybe our types of capacity on the supply side need to adapt. We might have bottlenecks in our supply. So all kinds of constraints on the supply side. And obviously, if those do not match, we have the problem of excess capacity in one part, and we might have a lack of capacity in another part of the organization. And as I said, every fluctuation on the capacity side might also involve a certain cost. Cost of staffing up, cost of staffing down, cost of changing your types of capacity. So we need to match a fluctuating demand with a constrained capacity. And even more than that, we need to synchronize our different sources of supply. It's about delivering value, not just work. So the typical situation is where demand requires the capacity of not just one team, but not just one source of supply, but at the same time it requires the capacity of different sources of supply. And then obviously, if only one of those teams is available and starts working, it cannot fulfill the request. It can only deliver work. It cannot fulfill the requests. It's only when all teams that are required can deliver their work that the request can be fulfilled, that value is delivered. So we need to synchronize. If not collaborate. If we need to synchronize as a prerequisite for teams to be able to collaborate, and to collaborate to deliver value. Now again, here we could contemplate a virtual Kanban system, and we could contemplate WIP limits as a theoretical solution to solve that problem. But then I'm not going to go into the details. But again, in practice, it's not going to be a solution. So again, we'll need to go back to the question of, can we have a token system that helps us to manage that problem. And so again, we're going to find our inspiration in a physical token system. So the inspiration here comes from job shops. So a job shop is not a manufacturing plant, but a plant where you have custom jobs, like making kitchens, and each job needs to go through different stations. In this case, the stations are A, B, C, D, E, and this could be stations to paint, to screw in things, to saw off things. I don't know. So each job needs to go to different stations, but not every job might follow a different route. So in this example, the green job goes through stations A, B, and D. The red jobs go through stations A, C, and then the purple jobs go through stations B, C, and E in order to be finished. Now again, If we just start the jobs as they come in, then obviously work can pile up. For example, if station B is already working on multiple jobs, then if we start the job that is waiting at station A, the green job that is waiting at station A, then that job will get stuck before station B, because station B is already working over capacity. Yeah. So again, we have a problem of inventory piling up, work piling up. So we need to synchronize our different stations around those jobs, so that if we start a job, we can also finish the job. Now I'm going to explain a token system, which is a simplified token system of what is really used in practice in these types of situations. It's a little bit of a simplification. The reality is a little bit more difficult, but for our purposes, that simplification is good enough. So we could have a token system where the tokens actually represent capacity at the different jobs. So the tokens named A represent capacity for A, the tokens for B represent capacity for B, and so on. And again, just like with the customer Kanban, we need the proper tokens in order to be able to start a job. So for example, a green job, which goes through A, B, and D, needs to have tokens for A, B, and D in order to actually be able to start. If I have the tokens for A, B, and D, then I'm sure that A, B, and D have capacity to actually do the job. And so I know that if I start the job will also be finished, and that it's not going to get stuck, and that jobs are not piling up. When are the tokens recycled? Obviously, the tokens are recycled when the job is finished, and they go back into the basket of available capacity, so that they become available to start new jobs. So, for example, to start the red job, which only requires A and C, and if I have tokens for A and C, I can start that red job with those tokens. So this is a very simple token system. It's a little bit of a simplification. It's a little bit more, in reality, it needs to be a little bit more elaborate, but for our purposes, it's good enough. So we can transport this idea to our context, and this, to me, my claim is that this is the beginnings of a real portfolio Kanban, not just a visualization, but a real portfolio Kanban. So how would this translate? Well, on the upstream side, we see that demand requires capacity of different teams. In the ready to execute, we see our basket of available capacity tokens. So that represents the available capacity of the different teams. So I can only start a request when I have the proper tokens. So in this case, the requests on top of the downstream board required red and green, and the red and green tokens were available, so the request could be started. And that means that team red and team green, team yellow have available capacity. They can work on it. They can work on it together. They can finish the request, and at that point in time, the two tokens get recycled into our basket of available tokens, into the ready to execute column. So what does the token system do? Well, first of all, it makes sure that work is not piling up, so it creates flow in our system, in our end-to-end flow. But at the same time, it's also a mechanism for synchronization. It synchronizes teams that need to work together, so that at least they can work together, so that they can collaborate. It also allows us to shape the demand in function of the constrained capacity. Yeah. Because now our capacity and the tokens actually represents the constraints, our constraints in volume of our capacity. It also, because that becomes obvious, that becomes tangible, we can start shaping the demand, start looking for demand that can optimally make use of our available capacity. And so the token system has a threefold function. One, avoiding work piling up. 2, synchronizing teams, and 3, it provides a way of being able to shape the demand in function of our constraints on the capacity side. Constraints become visible if we have a bottleneck on the supply side. That will become visible through the availability of the capacity tokens. So again, we have a very simple token system, and again, it's an effectual capability, the token system, in the sense that it's a system that enables flow, enables collaboration between teams, but also enables the upstream to take the constraints of downstream into account and to start shaping demand so that we make optimal use of our downstream capacity. So again, virtual WIP limit, virtual gamma system could theoretically be a solution, but the token system is a way more practical and more powerful solution. Good. So again, I leave a pass for some questions.
All right. And I know that Patrick has a question, so why don't you go ahead and ask, Patrick?
First, a disclaimer. Really, I didn't get paid to ask all those questions. Right? I'm not seated. But maybe you should pay me, Mahat.
I found a Patrick to ask questions.
Right? But this is because it's a very, very interesting topic, very, very practical. So, I definitely see the advantage of the token system, and what I'm not very clear yet is if you already have a virtual Kanban system or end-to-end system, would you use the token system to complement it, or remove or replace it, or is there a transition period if you're replacing it?
You would still employ virtual Kanban systems at the team level?
Yeah. Or like upstream part, right?
Yeah. So the token system would function more at the higher levels. So across teams, upstream. So it functions more at the higher levels, but you still have virtual Kanban systems at the team level.
Right. Okay. So basically, you're replacing your own upstream Kanban?
No. So upstream Kanban still applies.
Okay.
I'm just not focusing on it in this presentation.
Okay. So you put this in to complement the upstream Kanban.
Yes, it's complementary to the upstream Kanban. So what you're doing is you have a visualization at the cross team level with an upstream, or even an upstream at the team level. You have a visualization with an upstream at the cross team level. You might have a portfolio Kanban. Now you start with visualization, but then you start adding the token systems to actually create flow and collaboration.
Right.
Also to enable agility also at those levels, so that you go beyond just doing the practices, but actually becoming agile.
And would you actually have to go through these steps, or would you actually introduce all of them if you didn't have one to start with?
Yeah. So you would go through the steps.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you would go through the steps. Visualization at the cross team level is something that is very much missing in many organizations still. Let alone at the portfolio level. So that's missing in many cases at many organizations. And so you would need to first go through the steps of visualization, making it visible, and then adding token systems as you go along.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Patrick, I have a question from Randy. Let me go ahead and unmute you. Randy, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Randy. Randy's mic might
I'm
be
not sure
mute.
if there. Randy, are you able to speak up and ask your question, or let me go ahead and ask the question that they had, and I'm not sure if you already sort of addressed it in a little bit just now in the last discussion, but the question was on how to sync upstream and downstream. And I wanted some clarification there, so that's why I wanted Randy to speak up, but looks like they may have some audio issues.
Yeah, so it depends a little bit on what Randy means with syncing upstream and downstream. Now, if it's a matter of making sure that upstream produces sufficient options at all times for the downstream to work on, then I would refer to the Essential Upstream Kanban Guide in terms of order points and using order points as a way of doing that. It's not in this presentation. It's a different focus. Order points and maybe triage. If it's a matter of syncing in terms of collaborating, then between upstream and downstream, then customer Kanban tokens are a good way to incentivize that collaboration, as I explained in the first case. Huh?
Right. Okay. I guess Randy's not able to speak on the call, but hopefully that takes care of the question. I had a separate question, Patrick. Both the capacity of a team or of multiple teams have a time dimension to it. They have sort of present capacity, they have future capacity, and people think about capacity planning or capacity allocation in terms of specific time periods during which they are looking at work to be done. The second, of course, is that jobs, depending on how big the jobs are, also have a time dimension. You start off a job with team A and you need the capacity of team B only, let's say, next week or next month or something like that. So how do you take care of this? The moment you have allocated a token to a job for a particular team, what is the implication in terms of how long have you booked up that team's capacity? How do you bring that time dimension into play, or how do you explain that?
Cool. Shall I answer that in my next part?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Sounds good.
Okay.
There is another question which I will take at the end, which is about you have any book references, but that's fine.
Okay.
We can that.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to end off with a little bit more of the game changing part, the visionary part, but then come back to something very practical. So now that I've introduced those two token systems, one can start wondering, is this the beginning of a marketplace? So what I already explained a little bit is the idea that at the core of every organization is the challenge of matching your demand with your supply. And with supply, I mean teams, the capacity of teams, and maybe also external supply, but all the means that you have to fulfill demand. So at the core of every organization is the function of you have incoming demand, you have your capacities, your capabilities, your supply, and how do you match those two? Now, in its core, that is a marketplace, and so the question comes up with the token systems: is this now the beginning of a marketplace? And then the related question is, why would you care? Why would this be important? In the context of agility, I think it's very important. It's actually crucial in the sense that if we can start thinking about this as a real marketplace and start organizing as a real marketplace, we're making a step towards a big step towards self-organization, disintermediation. Self-organization in terms of going back to the roots of economy in terms of Adam Smith, in terms of the spontaneous order that you see in a marketplace, a self-organizing order in a marketplace where demand creates supply and supply creates demand. So in terms of agility, I think it's really important to start thinking about this as a marketplace, and how can we really organize it as a marketplace so that we can use that self-organizing behavior of marketplaces. Now, I do think with the token systems, we're moving in that direction. Capacity tokens are the things that you sell and buy in the marketplace. They are assets in the sense that assets like the commodities that you buy and sell in the marketplace, in the sense that it's on the supply side. That's what we offer. It's capacity. We offer the tokens, and actually on the demand side, we bid for those tokens. Which is probably the case if there's customers, the different sources of demand are competing with each other, and maybe also the different sources of supply are competing with each other, then this truly becomes a marketplace. So the tokens are our assets. The question now is, do we have a currency? Yes. So the capacity tokens are the assets. The customer command tokens are a form of currency. Yeah. The customer needs customer command tokens in order to pay or to buy options upstream. The customer command tokens are customers to buy the option to start a request upstream. So they are a currency token. Now they're only a currency token to start a request. They're not yet a currency token to buy capacity tokens, to buy our assets. Yeah. But again, just like the customer command, we can imagine other currency tokens that could be used to buy capacity tokens. And then not as a way using a token system for that, not as a way to do internal accounting or any other type of bureaucratic thing like that, but more as a gamification. Think like buy a feature in the innovation games. More as a gamification, so that we can get that self-organizing principle starting to kick in that marketplace. So surely we start seeing the beginnings of a marketplace. We have assets, we have a currency, and just like with any marketplace, now we can start also thinking about liquidity. Liquidity is one of the essential characteristics of a marketplace, because it tells us something about how easy it is to set prices, how easy it is to make transactions, how easy it is to do something very quickly, what is the cost of doing things quickly. So liquidity is really a core concept of any marketplace. So not going to elaborate on it, but just very quickly. So in a marketplace where there's low liquidity, that means that this is a marketplace where we have very few matching options. So that means if we have few matching options, that we will also have very few transactions going on. And every transaction will take time because the matching options need to find each other. So it's going to be very hard to set a price because we have few reference points, because we have very few transactions. And also, if in a low liquidity market, if I want to buy something very quickly, I will need to lower my price. If I want to buy very quickly, I will need to higher my price maybe substantially. So low liquidity markets are markets. It's like specialty stocks markets You have little transactions, so it's very hard to set a price. And if you do want to do something quickly, it will cost you a lot. High liquidity markets on the other hand, so those are commodity markets. You have many matching options. So price setting is easy. If I want to do something quickly, it doesn't cost me a lot. I can sell and buy very quickly. So those are very desirable markets. Now again, this has a very deep meaning for us in terms of business agility. I think this is a core. Liquidity is a core indication of business agility. Obviously, we want to have a high level of liquidity. In our story of matching demand and supply, we want to have a lot of options to match demand and supply. Because if we have good matching of demand and supply, we have good enterprise flow, and so that means that we have an organization that can easily adapt to changes in volume, changes in type. So we have a very agile organization. How do we come to that high level of agility? Well, we need more options on the downstream side, more optionality on the downstream side. We need more optionality on the upstream side. More optionality on the downstream side means that we need to have more flexibility in terms of teams that can take up different types of demand, teams that can scale rapidly up or down. So this is the notion of staff liquidity. So that means liquidity on the downstream side. Liquidity on the upstream side means that we need to have more optionality in the demand. So embedded options, order points. So this is splitting things into smaller, splitting demand into smaller pieces so that we have more optionality. These are all elements of a more agile organization. So liquidity is an indication of agility. So I think that's so the notion of a marketplace with its liquidity is where we want to strive for. But then again, I wanted to end on a very practical note, and so I'm going to come back to the question that Mahesh also asked. On the practical side, tokens starts to become our unit of capacity, and so we can start doing all kinds of very practical things with it. Most importantly, the practical side means through the token system we can decouple capacity allocation from organization. So what do I mean? Because we're making our tokens, we're actually using tokens, we can start moving those tokens around. So for example, one of the disadvantages of a token system could be that we favor smaller requests because they only need one token, so they get matched more easily. So we could start devising a policy where we're not using our tokens immediately. We had some delay, but we also can move tokens upstream if I know that there's a strategic request, an important request coming in, and I want to make sure that as soon as the request needs to start, is ready to start, that we have the capacity. Well, we can move those capacity tokens upstream to start reserving that capacity, so that if the request is ready to commit, we can immediately start the request. Now, obviously, I'm reserving capacity, so that means that I'm aware that maybe the team to which that capacity belongs might not be fully utilized, but that's a strategic decision. But that capacity could also be used to help in terms of making the request ready. So in terms of incentivizing for collaboration between downstream and upstream. Likewise, if we have a strategic initiative, like in the bottom of the board, if we have a strategic initiative that requires a certain capacity for a longer period of time, we can move the capacity tokens into a separate lane to actually reserve that capacity. So that creates kind of a sub-marketplace, in which we continuously recycle the capacity tokens within that lane, within that sub-marketplace. But this creates quite some flexibility in the sense that we can reserve capacity, still using the same team structure, but only using a certain capacity from those teams. We could also decide that if we reserve capacity, we also start creating a dedicated team for that strategic initiative. But I'm decoupling the capacity reservation from the team structure. So in a traditional organization, if I want to reserve capacity, most of the time the way we do it is by putting a team together. Here we can decouple those two things. Yes. So that creates a lot of flexibility. Yeah. In terms of planning, we can have a capacity planning at the top of the board. And now we're starting to plan our capacity in terms of token months. The capacity planning will express in terms of for a number of tokens for a certain bandwidth in the team, that for a certain period of time, we need to have a number of tokens for a certain period of time planned in our capacity planning. If we require a request that is if we have a request that needs to be speeded up, we can add capacity tokens of the same kind to that request, so that even if it's a big request, it can be delivered in a shorter time period. So we can start moving those tokens around. And the most important part is that we decoupled the notion of capacity from people, and then also we decoupled the notion of capacity from team structure. So this points into the beginnings of a more liquid organization. So if we look at the evolution of agility in organizations, we moved from component teams towards feature teams, and feature teams are a very good pattern. But now we elevated that pattern to a principle, which leads to big reorganizations. But with the capacity token system, we don't have to. We can have a more liquid organization where we monitor the emergent patterns, where we see how capacity tokens are set aside and recycled in their own lane. We can start monitoring the emergent patterns, and based on that, we can start regrouping our teams based on the current needs, and gradually move towards feature teams. But even feature teams might turn into silos. And then again, if we monitor the emergent patterns where we see that certain groups of capacity tokens are used together, we might need to decide to actually create feature teams. I don't know how you would call that, but so this moves in towards a more liquid organization, where the organization adapts gradually, evolve in an evolutionary way, continuously evolve according to the needs of and the changes in the market. So to close off, the Agile way is not just doing Agile, it's not even just being Agile, the core is becoming Agile. And for the becoming of Agile, we need to have effectual capabilities, and that also applies at the level of the organization. So it's not only enabling teams, it's enabling the entire organization to become more agile. The virtual Kanban systems are an effectual capability, enable agility at the team level, but the extension of that to me is a tokenomics, an agile token system that if we want to scale that to the organizational level. to me, the token system really forms the core of an agile business. Just like virtual Kanban systems form a core of an agile team. Is a token system the only core of an agile business? No, it's one perspective. It taps more into the flow perspective of an enterprise flow perspective. Obviously, self-governance, people making decisions together, is another core element of an agile business. Okay. But the token system fills in a lack in terms of catering for matching demand and supply, which is the core business function in a self-organizing way. Agile business capabilities emerge out of that. So the token systems help to allow an agile business capability to emerge. In its core, it's the capability to match demand and supply. So the capacity tokens are crucial in that. But they're also core to the capability to create and shape demand. We saw how capacity tokens can help to shape the demand in order to make best use of the constrained supply. But then also they help to through the concept of liquidity, they help to improve our capability to deliver in order to meet a fluctuating demand. So as I introduced in the beginning, there's something practical, there's something more deep to it. The practical side is all the practicalities of using a token system in order to manage capacity, to manage to create customer pool. But then there's a deeper element in terms of creating marketplaces that take organizations to the next level of self-organization. So with that, I want to stop. I think I'm already a little bit over time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we are quite a bit over time, but that's okay. I think the topic is of interest to all the people who are all the people who stayed back, and even others who let me know that they had to get off. But this was a great webinar. So great, Patrick. Thank you very much. That was an awesome talk. I want to check with the audience for any last-minute questions. And in the meantime, there's a question, Patrick, from Guy Winterbottom on any book references or any reading material that you might want to share with the audience.
The capacity token system for me was inspired on quick response manufacturing, which there's a book, It's About Time. So that's worthwhile if you want to dive a little bit deeper into the background of capacity tokens. Yeah, the customer Kanban, I would refer to the Essential Upstream Kanban Guide. I started reading up myself on tokenomics. The quote on tokenomics that is in the slide refers to an author on a book on tokenomics, which might be worthwhile also to have a look into.
Okay, great. There is a question from Igor Kusmanus. I'm sorry, I'm maybe pronouncing the name badly. Let me go ahead and unmute you. If you could go ahead and ask your question online.
Good evening.
Hi.
Hi, Igor.
Yeah, thanks for presentation. So it was really interesting. So my question, how is this capacity token system is applicable for integration of Kanban with Scrum, kind of Scrumban, in your opinion? And if there are any good practical cases who already use it in Scrumban.
So Scrumban, to my knowledge, is something that applies to the team level. So the capacity tokens are a notion or a concept that that applies when you have multiple teams.
Mm-hmm.
So they sit a little bit on top of what you're talking about, and so they sit a little bit on top of the teams. So in that sense, it's quite it's not irrelevant what the teams do. I don't think it's irrelevant what the teams do, but so teams do need to have some idea about what their capacity is in terms of work in progress, and need to have their process under control in order to be able to effectively use a system like capacity tokens. But the Scrum versus Kanban discussion and the Scrumban discussion is more a discussion at the team level.
So it's you want to say that it's about organization level, yeah. But if we, for example, take less, yeah, is it might be applicable as it less is more on organizational level?
Yeah. I'm not an expert on less. I'm not an expert on less. Now I would tend to think that this would be compatible with most, if not all, of the scaling frameworks. I'm pretty sure that it's because I have my own experiences with that. I'm pretty sure that it's compatible with SAFe, with the SAFe ideas. I would assume that it's compatible with less, in the sense that it can be an effectual capability to move towards what less would consider an agile organization. So a mechanism for change to move towards an effectual capability to change towards an organization composed out of feature teams.
Okay, thanks. Sounds good for me.
Yeah.
All right, Patrick, you had a question, Patrick Lee.
Yeah, I couldn't get my head around when you're in the marketplace, for example, especially when you're reserving capacity for strategic projects. Does that involve forecasting then? Because if only team who has finished delivery comes into exchanges their token or hands over their token, then they're like you wouldn't want them to be sitting around, right? So I'm assuming. So I couldn't picture that.
Yeah.
If you could help me explain that a little bit.
Yes. So this is moving towards planning, yeah. Yeah. So the most simple case, is where you have an important request coming up, like the one that you see on the slide.
X, Y, Z, yeah, or Y. Okay, fine.
For customer Y, yeah, you have an important. Suppose that you have a request coming up that has to do with regulatory, where you have a fixed date. And so what you want to make sure is that if that request is ready to commit, has successfully gone through the upstream, what you want to make sure is that as soon as it's ready to commit, we have the capacity to actually execute it.
Right.
So you might not want to wait until the tokens become available because that might delay too much.
Right.
So in that case, what you would do is, as soon as an appropriate token becomes available, you already move that token upstream. Now that's an indication that you're reserving that capacity for that upcoming request.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now what you are well aware of is that you're creating maybe a little bit of starvation in the team.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That the team might be working under capacity.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a conscious decision. Now, if you only have one token, then obviously you're starving the team completely. But most of the times, teams have multiple tokens, so you're not completely starving the team, but you know that the team is working maybe a little bit under capacity.
Right.
Yeah. Now that excess capacity typically is also useful, because if it's an important request, the team has an incentive to already start collaborating upstream and start helping with preparing that request.
Right.
Because you need that capacity often. Yeah.
Right. And the different color of tokens, would that indicate more of expertise kind of thing, or the like skilled type of thing?
Yeah. So I didn't explain, but obviously the tokens correspond to the different sources of supply. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
So if you have team blue, team red, team yellow, then the blue tokens correspond to team blue, the red tokens to team red, and the yellow tokens to team yellow. So they correspond to the different capabilities of the different teams.
Yes, but what I'm wondering is, because you may have cross-functional teams and you may have
Yes.
component teams.
Yes.
And if you have multiple cross-functional teams, would you have multiple color tokens for the cross-functional teams, right?
Yep. As you see here.
Right. And is that better to have one token with multicolor, or you actually have multiple tokens of single color?
Oh no, you would have one token with multiple colors.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's only one capacity.
Yeah. Yeah, because
it's a flexible capacity. Yeah. It's a flexible capacity. Yeah.
Right.
And in terms of liquidity, you want to have more multicolored tokens.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's more agile. So it becomes very visible.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions?
All right, thank you very much for that question, Patrick. So looks like we don't have any more questions, and I know we are really over time. So I think we'll probably stop here. Patrick, any other closing thoughts?
Well, mainly I want to thank everybody for staying this long, and my apologies for running over time a little bit.
No worries. Thank you for a great session. Thank you all for joining today and staying this late. And we will follow up with an email to the recording of the webinar. And of course, if you need to get in touch with us, you have the contact information available on the slides as well. Or we can share that with you separately. Again, so this, like I was saying, was the last webinar for our 2019 calendar. We look forward to launching the 2020 calendar soon. And I hope, Patrick, that we will do some more such webinars together. And in the meantime, stay tuned for updates from our side. Thank you again, and have a great rest of the day, rest of the week. And we'll see you soon again.
Thank you.